Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews Podcast. I am your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 578. Releasing in the US on December 12 on digital and on demand is Under the Influencer, a dramatic comedy in which a successful YouTube star named Tori undergoes a quarter-life crisis when her online brand struggles to maintain its popularity with a younger audience. Featuring a charismatic lead performance by Toylor Scorse, Under the Influencer is a charming and at times poignant exploration into the humanity of those behind the screen. And joining me now to talk about Under the Influencer is the film's writer and director, Mr. Alex Haughey. Alex, how are you?
Great, Matt. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming back on. We are just talking offline before about how you were on, well, I think it was like 2018, 2019
Yeah,
maybe, when
2018,
Prodigy came out.
yeah.
And I love Prodigy, and to see that you had another film up and running, I knew I just had to talk to you about it. And Under the Influencer is a really interesting work, and just listening to some interviews that you've done, and and reading some interviews as well. It comes from a certain place of, I wouldn't call it biographical, but certain points of experience in that you actually worked for a YouTuber for like a number of years. And I was really curious about when you approach a job like that. Is there judgment? Is there perception into that kind of profession? And when after you've done working with a person like that, which from everything I read was a very positive experience for you, does that kind of frame the way that you wanted to create the character of Tori and the approach to her profession? Because I don't know about you, when people hear influencer, there's certain characteristics, a certain kind of negativity, there's certain perceptions that people have. So I'm just wondering if that was something that you had to go through yourself.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I guess I would start by saying that, yeah, I'm very aware of those perceptions of what, an influencer is to people. And I think that that's part of the reason I felt like this would be an interesting story to approach, because I wanted to capitalize on those preconceived notions people had about, what an influencer is and what they do. And, that a lot of us are kind of like arm's length about these people that we think are kind of, taking advantage in some ways of this like rising new platform, and not necessarily having to engage in life in the same way a lot of us are. And so when I went into work with this young lady who I worked for, it was I tried to go in with an open mind, and she was a very big YouTuber at the time. And so I thought, oh, we'll be able to like have the resources to actually do this professionally, and hire crews and have teams and work the way you're kind of supposed to in terms of production as it goes. I was very quickly disabused of those notions when it was actually more like the stereotypes than I was expecting it to be. I was kind of expecting to have that veil kind of pulled off my eyes and see who this person really was. And I think that I did to a certain extent, but it was also very much, she very much was this character that lived this life outside of reality, and would kind of meander through her days, in whatever way she pleased. So I would say that I was, when I left the job, I thought she was lovely as a person. But I think that my main observations throughout my year working for her were, I was really raised a major sense of sadness for me because of her isolation, and the fact that, like, when you really get into it, like, she had a very deeply cynical view of interpersonal relationships, from my perspective, because for 10 years, all anyone had come to her for was what she could provide them, what they could take from her. So that was something that I found really interesting. And I mean, I'll be clear, that was when I left that job behind, I did not think I would return to that world. It was kind of like, I want to get back to telling stories in a more proper way. But I saw this old French movie, Cleo from 5 to 7, which you've probably seen, which is just amazing. And it reminded me so much of her as a character, the way that character is kind of handled and not allowed to do things for herself in this kind of, again, same way meandering through this existence. And I really thought that that would be a fascinating way to, structure something that, if it had that like modern context of my experience with this influencer, could create something that was really an interesting and unique update on what that movie was able to do so well. So that's kind of where the idea blossomed from, was seeing that and being reminded so much of her as a character, and that's where that kind of grew out of.
Please support Matt's movie reviews on Patreon. Get access to exclusive content, request movie reviews and top 10 lists, and help support my work. Please click on the Patreon link in the description below. The character of Tori is really interesting in that we're dealing with almost like a few different personalities in the movie, but it's all in the one person. The online personality, the person behind the screen, and then there's another kind of parts of her as well that show up in the movie. And I think it was really important for trying to find the right, actor, right actress to play that. And Toylor Scorse, I think, did a fantastic job in this movie. And I think what's so really appealing in regards to her is that there's a charisma to her. You can totally tell why people will be drawn to watching Tori as an online presence, because charisma is such a big part. That I think there's two factors I think that differentiate really successful YouTube people from those who don't quite get there. Number one is a charisma factor. It is the reason why you want to watch them in the first place. And number two, they look at their online presence more as a business than more than anything else. I think that's a kind of like a really important way to go about it too. And Taylor, how she does Tori in the film and getting all those layers right, especially that charisma part, is so vital, I think, to making that sing. But when it comes to casting that, though, it was hard to try to find your Tori, or did you know Taylor from beforehand? How do you kind of get her into the role and get her into the shoes of Tori so well in this movie?
Yeah, it's look, she's fantastic. I absolutely lucked out just finding her in general, because I think she's gonna very soon be unattainable for a small movie like this, just because I think she's such a great actress. She's so talented, and made my job really easy. I had actually cast her in a short film that I was trying to make during COVID that never ended up materializing. And so when I started this process, I knew I didn't really have the money to go after like a star, but I knew that I needed, like you said, I needed this personality that would explode off the screen, in order to actually make this work. And also, I think you keyed on it a little bit too. I also think it's important that, again, she's this character that I want people to be a little repulsed with at first, but again, you can't help but be drawn into her kind of orbit. And that's what I think is really important about it, is because we really wanted people to be a little iffy at first, and then slowly start getting invested and intrigued by her and what her world was. So I knew I needed to find an actress that could do so much in order to make that happen. And so I did a huge process of searching. We got thousands of submissions, and I sent it to Taylor right when I was posting it and said, like, look, I want you to audition for this. But I didn't know the role I had cast her for was way different from this. So it wasn't, I wasn't necessarily convinced that, like, oh, she's going to get this personality part of it right. And so I had the actresses really do 3 separate tapes for me with kind of the different parts of her personality. And that's the way I kind of whittled it down to the finalists. And then I really, in the excuse me, in the callbacks, I wanted to make sure they could really stretch emotionally. And so we kind of pushed into one of the more emotional scenes from the movie. And I mean, Taylor nailed all the big loud, influencer-y personality bits in that first part. And so that made it easy for me to call her back in, and the emotional stuff was the stuff I knew she would be able to do. And so once I had her at that phase, I was kind of like, oh, I bet I was kind of like, I'm kind of thinking she might be the one. And then she just obviously nailed that as well. And this really was this incredible collaboration between the two of us. where we were just, working on the script for back and forth with each other. We sat down and went through the whole thing, top to bottom, just exchanging notes, talking about the character, where we're at this point in that. And then she was there for rehearsals of every scene with all the different actors that are in it, to just like really, really buckle down where we needed to be so that we could, accomplish the movie on, we're still a pretty small movie, so we had a 13-day shoot or something. So we needed to be on point when we were on set. And Taylor made it super easy because, there was hardly a take where I had to say, Taylor, do it again. You did that part wrong, because she was on point all the time.
Something else that was on point, I think, is the choice of costume in the style of the character. The look is very distinct, vibrant. I don't know why, but when I was watching Taylor as Tori, I kept thinking cotton candy because of the pinks and the blues that kept showing up all the time.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I got a sweet tooth all of a sudden.
Well, I mean, it's that kind of like junk food aesthetic, I think is spot on, because I feel like that's kind of what we're presenting.
And that's because that sweetness, right, kind of pops off the screen, and the vibrancy as well. So when it comes to putting that together, did you and Taylor kind of mess with different looks, or did you know what type of look you wanted to go for with in regards to Tori?
Yeah, so my my costume designer, her name's Anna Gregorian. She, has worked with me before, and she's like a miracle worker. This movie was, enormous in terms of the demand on the costumer, because there's like, I think Taylor herself has over 50 looks in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
They all have to be big and loud. A lot of them. I mean, the vast majority of them are these kind of vibrant looks. So yeah, we talked a lot about that, and we went through the color palettes, and we tried to always be mindful of how she was bouncing off the other characters in every scene, and what, how we would differentiate her between other characters, and between her and the other sides of her own personality. So it was a vast and extensive process, and like, again, that's the kind of thing that, when you can find the collaborators that can make that work for you, it's like, that's what makes this movie feel like a much bigger movie than it actually was because we really had the people that were invested in the important parts. And I think that the costume design and the production design specifically were the specific parts that I knew, like, we got to get that right. Otherwise it's going to feel cheap, and it's not going to feel like realistic to the story we're telling.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by TeePublic. TeePublic is the world's largest marketplace for independent creators to sell their work on the highest quality merchandise. With over 1.2 million designs, TeePublic is sure to have something you love. Speaking about the film's look, it's really interesting in this movie how when a third act hits, there's a switch. I think I heard another interviewer say to you it's kind of like a record flip. And that is kind of true stylistically. Did you change the way that you use cameras and stock in regards to that? Because I could kind of tell like a graininess, a more natural kind of to it, as opposed to the Tory bits had a more kind of synthetic kind of feel. I think, and I know why you were doing that, but that was really something that you wanted to really do from the beginning. You wanted to make sure that the visual approach to those two sides are very different to one another.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was something I was adamant about from the jump, is that, I knew we were going to take this big swing into the third act, that is tonally very different than the rest of the movie. And so I didn't want to feel like we were in the same world. I wanted to feel like we broke out of that world, and we're in kind of a different story at that point, because I really felt like it was important not to try and hold on to that same aesthetic that we built throughout the early parts of the movie. And yeah, I mean, we basically jumped from a very clean digital look to a 16 millimeter, vibe in that last third of the movie. And what I told my DP, and the kind of the way we ended up deciding on the style was, I said to him, like, I don't want this to just to feel like a subtle switch. Like I want somebody who doesn't, isn't a movie person to be able to say, this is different. I want my dad to be able to say, like, was something's different here. And so that's where I wanted it to be a big jump, and I was really pleased with, again, my DP was amazing. And so I was really pleased with the way we were able to test some things out and find an aesthetic that feels more raw and natural, but also like a little more dreamlike in that last act. Because I felt like it was important for it to have a totally different aesthetic than the world that she had built up for herself. That clean, pristine, artificial, like you said, look from the first two acts.
There's something that comes up in this movie when I was watching it, in regards to this kind of like persona that Taylor's character has. This almost old Hollywood, classic Hollywood kind of like personification of ego that kind of shows up now and again. Like whenever she's feeling down, like the ego is kind of like, hey, look at your numbers, we've done billions of things, Bob, and all that kind of stuff. And when I was watching it, what came to my mind straight away was Sunset Boulevard, the William Wyler movie. That Gloria Swanson plays Norma Desmond in that film. And for anyone who hasn't watched Sunset Boulevard, I could really highly recommend. I know I'm noticing lately some of my demographics getting a little lower there. So any of you youngins out there, please listen and watch it, because that was like, to me, the ultimate kind of movie where the one star fading away as she's getting older and such.
Right.
Was that movie, Sunset Boulevard, influential in any way in how you wanted to kind of portray, not of course the look of the film, but at least the psychology of the character of Tori in the movie?
Absolutely. So I had Taylor watch that movie when we started, and I think there's even a direct reference to it when she says the first time we see
says, but she said, I got the quote here actually because I wrote it down. We're big, it's the platform that got small.
It's the platform that got small, right? Exactly. So I thought that was a really fun way, and I just, that was one of the first early ideas that I thought would make this a really fun play on things, is to give this, bubbly, bubblegum cotton candy influencer this ego that thinks she's this kind of like Hollywood starlet from the glory days of the golden era of Hollywood, and so I wanted her to be some kind of mix of Gloria Swanson and Katharine Hepburn or Audrey Hepburn, or just kind of like those old, really really vibrant and just kind of undeniable kind of stars from the past. And I loved the idea that this YouTuber would have this ego driving her that like fancies herself on that level. Because I think that's something I observed. I talked to several other influencers too, and had this observation, is that they really did think that they had something, even though their time kind of came and went. They thought, like, they all said the same thing, that like, I knew I was ahead of the curve, in terms of driving the platform and the content that was coming out of it. They all believed that they had this magic bullet, and I thought that was a funny way to kind of materialize that. And I immediately attached onto the idea that, like, yeah, she's got this ego that fancies herself much more glamorous than she actually is in real life.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Amazon Prime Video. One of the best on-demand streaming services available, Amazon Prime Video features exclusive Amazon originals as well as popular movies and TV shows. Watch Amazon Prime Video anytime, anywhere. Speaking of Hollywood, there's a part in the movie where Taylor is showing this guy around Los Angeles in the third act, and he's kind of really dismissive of the city at first. He's like, it's just a bunch of highways in between dirt patches, and she's like, well, it depends where you go, it depends what you look at. And I think what's interesting to me is that I love watching Los Angeles movies, and especially, I don't know why, I love watching those Los Angeles movies that kind of delve away from the more kind of cliche kind of things and go into the areas, into the places, and the history of especially of the entertainment industry. I mean, that's the Dream Factory, right? That's La La Land. That's
right.
That's where it is. I know you yourself aren't a California native, but you live there now. Is that right?
Yeah, I've lived here for, gosh, you know, and almost what 18 years or so. So yeah,
So
it's like
when you
I've basically half my life is now as a Los Angeles, an Angelino.
so when you come to LA, when you or that 18 years ago, what are your perceptions of Los Angeles at that time? And the way that they kind of debate what Los Angeles is in the movie, is that kind of like yourself, like when you got here and you're like, look, it's nothing here, but then as you're there for a little while, you're like, you know what? Down there is where so and so happened. Over there is where so and so. There's this thing
Yeah.
here. There's things at nighttime, at midnight. This place that's usually gridlocked. You can drive through it. It looks great. The lights are out. I mean, was that something that you had to experience yourself?
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely a conversation with myself. And but it's funny, it's kind of actually reversed. It's like when I first came to Los Angeles, I was in college, and so I was at school most of the time, but then when I would venture out of that area, it was always to go to the more glamorous areas of LA, that you go to when you're going out to do something here or there. So it and that was something in the movie she talks about. Sometimes I would just drive at night. I would drive down to the beach or just drive through downtown. That was like right by, my school is USC is right downtown. So I would drive up, up the 110, and that's where again, the buildings of downtown really are kind of built over that highway. And it really does have this very dreamlike quality of driving through this passageway into this big new enchanting world. And his perspective is probably more what my idea of LA is now.
Uh-huh.
Which is I've been here for too long, and I've seen everything now, and I know that like those glamorous areas aren't the majority of it. A lot of it's just crammed together and messy, and too many people. And so I think that it's a city that holds a charm and a wonder, and that's totally undeniable. But like a lot of people, once you've kind of been here for the longest time, you start to see it for the dirt beneath its fingernails a little bit more. And so I think that was an interesting scene to write, because that was always something I had kept in my mind of that how kind of magical it felt when I was young, and I would go and make that drive, and it would feel like I really am somewhere that's bigger than where I came from. and that was something I obviously incorporated into the movie.
It's really interesting how I know we're near the end of 2023 now, and a lot of the interviews I've had this year, something that's come up quite a bit is just like how much of a struggle a lot of filmmakers had because there was COVID and then the strikes and then a lot of other stuff too. Now that stuff is pretty much, hopefully, behind us. Yourself as a filmmaker now, I know like during COVID you were trying to work on some things didn't work out, and Prodigy had a really good kind of momentum behind it. COVID hit, but now you got this film out under the influence. So what do you think is going to be next for you? Are you going to try to jump into the next thing straight away as soon as like under the influence has its run, or are you I mean, what's it like for you now as an indie filmmaker in Los Angeles and in Hollywood? Is it better than before, worse? I'm really kind of curious about that.
I mean, I think it depends on your situation. I'm trying to I'm moving towards making a big push, because I've, in between things, I've always been, working this and that, like all over the industry in video games. I've done some writing for animation and directing in that world too. So, I kind of, to a certain extent, you kind of have to take what you can get, but I'm making a conscious effort to not take so much time between my features, because I have an idea for what I want to do next, and it's kind of in an outline phase, and I want to, once I get through this release and get it out there, that's what I want to focus on whenever I have time to focus on it, and try to push to actually dive in to make something sooner rather than later. And I'm making a big push to get management behind me now, so that I can take a step take a step into, bigger budgets, and like being able to attach a name to the project so that I can take that next step forward and really make this, really make this more than just something that I do when I get the chance to. I want to be in the driver's seat. And so, yeah, it's a daunting road, but with this coming out, it really does feel like, I can see a path forward in that regard. And if it has some success, I think that there's going to be an opportunity for me to take a step into, this next thing I want to do, which it's not a huge project. It's still a pretty doable project, but I could do it in a way that's a little less super independent and a little more low budget independent. So that's my plan. And, I'm obviously, again, the wind blows one way one day and another way the next day. So I can't, I can't control that all the time, but I feel pretty confident right now that I've got some momentum behind me, and if I can keep that wind in my sails, I'm gonna actually absolutely drive towards trying to get shooting my next project in the next year.
Well, I can't wait for that to happen, because I'm so happy to see that you're back out there with Under the Influencer. If people look now over Rotten Tomatoes, you can see that big 100% mark next to it. Everyone who's reviewed it has loved it, including myself. My review will be up there soon. That 100% is still going to be up there. I really recommend people check this movie out on digital on demand. So, Alex, whereabouts on digital can people watch Under the Influencer?
Amazon is probably the best and most ubiquitous place that people watch, but it's everywhere. It's iTunes, it's Google, Vudu, all the streaming services have it. Yeah, I'm really excited to get it out there. I think with Prodigy, my favorite part of the process was actually getting it out into the world, because I felt like it was a movie that resonates more with real people rather than movie people. And I think coming from kind of the middle of the country and that being my upbringing, I feel like I have a read on what the average folk like. And I think that this is another movie that I think real people are going to like even more than movie people, which so far movie people have been liking it. So that's it's a good sign. But yeah, I'm really excited to get out there and kind of see what the reception is from a broader audience.
Excellent. Well, Alex, I'm going to have this podcast up today. I'm going to have my review up soon as well. And as soon as I get everything up, I'll send you links and everything so you can, have a listen and everything else. And yeah, man, it's been really good to talk to you again. It's been a long time, but yeah, it's awesome to see you're back at it with your work. And once this Under the Influencer has its run, and you get that next one up and coming, you let me know, and I'll be happy to share whatever comes out from that. So all good.
Absolutely, keep you posted.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content.